he's an interesting choice of individual to choose to do a brand. Like, it was a bit left field, not someone I'd expected, not someone you'd traditionally attach to like a wellness proposition.
Hello again. Welcome back.
Welcome back.
Another episode of D2C Diaries today. Solo ep. Just getting stuck into like a really big deep dive on David Beckham's new brand, IM8, which the team have put together like a really, really in-depth funnel breakdown, going through the whole funnel, because I think they've done a lot right during this launch, and they've gone very aggressive and some interesting things that we're going to get into today. But what do you want to cover as part of this breakdown?
The D2C head-to-head of the year. Who would have seen British cult hero David Beckham going head-to-head with D2C darling Athletic Greens in such a vicious attack on their products and positioning?
It's just like the fusion of two different worlds, isn't it?
It really is. And like, so for those watching, David Beckham has come together with a huge biotech, publicly listed biotech company, Promentia. I think I might have butchered the name there, but 1.5 billion valuation, huge business, to bring out IM8 Health, which is a daily functional wellness beverage. I think we'd call it
Athletics greens, but
red.
and better, apparently.
Yeah, and God, don't they tell you? So yeah, the team have put together a huge deep dive and a whimsical board, which we will leave in the comments, that goes through the funnel top to bottom, and we're gonna dive into that on today's episode. I think when looking at the brand, it and what they've done well, I think it is like a checklist of many things that we talk about on this podcast. They've not executed everything perfectly, I think, which we'll get into, but founder story, different awareness phases, third-party publishers,
Experts,
really clear, systematic objection handling, intentional landing pages, funnels. So I think it's just, yeah, going to be interesting to dive in and chat through each stage of that.
Yeah, comment down below IM8 and we will send you the full funnel breakdown on Whimsical, because it's an absolutely massive resource. So yeah, everything that we'll be talking about today, you can find there.
Yeah, we did one of those LinkedIn reposts, and it actually managed to get it in the hands of the CEO of the company that launched the brand, and he was very impressed himself.
Yeah, he DM'd you, didn't he?
Yeah, he was impressed with our breakdown, which I think says a lot about the quality and the time that the team put into it. But yeah, I guess before we dive into like the tactics, I think it's worth starting with like brand, because I think that's one thing that they do very well, and brand through the lens of like real consistency. I think it's immediately clear as you start to go through all of their touch points, whether it's ads, whether it's landers, whether it's organic, that element of brand alignment, I'd say, throughout it, without being too precious about the execution. So color schemes, fonts, the way they speak about the products, I think.
Yeah, messaging is like very science backed.
Yeah, very intentional. Very intentional, I think, is the word I'd use. So it's immediately clear if you side by side, and it becomes very obvious on the when you look at that whimsical board, when you side by side funnel, ad, cart, products, like regardless of the page, there's that element of consistent brand narrative, consistent brand colors, consistent brand scheme. And I think that's something that I think when looking at other brands, they can overlook and kind of lose as you go through. I think we had Surrey on the other day. I think they're another example of someone who does that balance of performance but alignment incredibly well at all the touch points. It's really immediately obvious when you're looking at an ad or a page that's associated with their brand, but they still are able to weave in the flexibility that allows for like performance best practice, which I think is a really, really interesting starting point.
Yeah, 100%. What are your thoughts on that, and like the impact that has across that whole entire marketing ecosystem in terms of consistency?
I think it helps with like an element of recognition and trust, I'd say. And I imagine it drives, like I don't have any hard data on this, but I can imagine it drives a step change in conversion rate when someone feels like that there's real continuity through a funnel. And I think there's consistency at a macro level across the brand, but there's also consistency like down one funnel, which I think is almost more important. Like the ad that someone sees is super consistent with the landing page message. So if it's David on an ad, he's on the page. The offer is aligned all the way through. The cart backs up what is on the lander. The objection handling is very intentional at each step related to the message that was in the ad itself. I think it's hugely important. I think that's that congruency and that alignment of ad and lander is something that I think many brands overlook. I think they're obsessed with the creative, but a lot of the time they don't pull it through the funnel.
Yeah, I think it just makes it more memorable as well, which means that when you're in the funnel, it's just you're going to remember from your previous touch point, and it's more likely you're going to be converted or be pushed lower within that funnel. And I think the way that they have used the red color really intentionally as well is like so memorable. And I think already the brand hasn't been around for long, but I associate now that red with IM8.
It's quite an off. It's like a strange red. It's like almost like a blood red, which is a really interesting color.
Yeah,
but yeah, definitely. Even on the third party whitelisting pages, it's very focused on that color. Like you can see, they're using a lot of publishers, but they're bringing that red color into the ads. A lot of those publishers are literally just us versus them ads versus Athletic Screens, which is interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's even continuity there, and there's a brand, there's a brand execution piece that spans beyond just their website and their own channels. I think it's interesting for anybody watching to, as a bit of a try it yourself exercise, to do what we've done on that Miro board and really just take a lot of screenshots of every touch point down the business and literally put them side by side and see if there are any disconnects and if there are any areas that just like don't fit. I think it becomes quite obvious when you do that, where that may be, if there's a point that you could improve.
Yeah, definitely. And I think comes back to this idea of like, in psychology, there's system 1 versus system 2 thinking. So system 1 thinking is more like intuitive, automatic. I think like 80-something% of your thoughts are fast, unconscious, emotional responses. And then system 2 are like the slower decisions that you make that you know you're more intentional about making. But the thing that how brand can really influence those fast decisions is by having something that is memorable, recognizable as part of the brand. So like that's why with a brand identity, it's so important to be thinking about those things and like what is that like recognizable piece that ties the individual back to the brand. And like on a macro level, like brands do this through characters. You know, traditionally, like you have the M&M character. You might have a jingle of some form that you associate with a brand, and the goal is to like push our thinking towards system 1 thinking, that like very intuitive thought process. And doing these like very subtle things as part of that brand identity can really help push through there.
I think a lot of big TV ads are really good at that. Like compare the meerkat.com,
Exactly,
compare the market.com, a lot of jingles, radio ads. Like can't think of one off the top of my head, which is bad, but like...
Do you remember the Frosties kid?
Yeah,
it's gonna taste great.
Yeah. that was a good one as well. I think Dr. Squatch are doing one with the comedian from the UK at the moment. He's all over the tube ads for the UK market. I've forgotten his name. He's an Instagram personality, kind of like a bit hunched over, big personality, and that again, that's like you start to kind of associate him with their funnels and their brand. So definitely works and is a pretty tried and tested tactic, which these guys are leveraging as well.
Yeah, 100%. And I think getting on to like, before we get into maybe a breakdown of the funnel itself, and then we're going to go into the paid creative and a bit of an audit there. Let's just talk a bit about like David Beckham being part of this brand, because obviously we've just banged on all of last year on the podcast about, you know, it's going to be more founder-led content, face of brands, and I feel like this brand is the epitome of like a modern day D2C brand in that sense.
Yeah. Did you have any of his haircuts when you were younger? The mohawk,
I
the
didn't.
skinhead,
I didn't have the
the
bottle.
blonde,
I didn't have the bottle for
the
it.
blonde
I wasn't a
dips.
good enough footballer to be pulling that
Neither
off.
did I. I only had the skinhead by accident when I shaved it off. Yeah, I think it's interesting to look at their use and execution, and like, I think this is one area where we could, I would say, we can be critical of
Yeah.
them slightly. I think he's an interesting choice of individual to choose to do a brand. Like, it was a bit left field, not someone I'd expected, not someone you'd traditionally attach to like a wellness proposition. Just like thinking of him as an individual, not that I follow his life that
I think
closely.
it makes sense though.
Yeah,
Like
I think
the nostalgia and obviously just the reach he has, and he's very much aged gracefully, looked after himself.
yeah,
He's a great
makes sense.
Yeah, he's a great figure for that. But as you say, I definitely think they could be utilizing that unfair advantage more.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to look at how they're using him, and I think you said just before we started recording, like it feels more like he's kind of sponsoring the brand rather than involved in it. I think that one of the easiest comparisons to do is side by side him with like a Gordon Ramsay at Hexclad, and then the way that they're using him in their output and ads, content, creative, and just the intention and standard of execution behind that. I feel like he's just at a different, is at another level. But yeah, he's obviously present in top of funnel ads. He's present on landing pages. He's doing a lot of that kind of, probably most of their content that sits within that unaware, problem aware bucket, or a lot of it, is leveraging him as an individual, which makes sense. I think it's instantly going to improve sort of click rates, thumb stop ratios, click through rates, just having his face present on these ads and having his backing. But I think there's a lot that they could be doing better in terms of that execution.
Yeah, 100%. I think like what we spoke about before the podcast and what we'll get onto is their whole strategy so far has been centered around this comparison to AG1, and almost like a complete attack on AG1. They've even got an us versus them on the website, and their paid strategy follows this approach for the most part. But then what I was saying before the podcast was like, if you're going to use someone like David Beckham to be the face of your brand, like there's like a whole nother massive audience that we could be going after, of like net new customers that aren't just potentially trying to convert people from AG1 to IM8. And again, I think one thing we'll get into with the creative strategy side is I think they should be, the way they should do that is like tapping into nostalgia, because that's what's going to trigger emotion. I think when you think David Beckham, you think, it's nostalgic, isn't it? Because you think of him as a footballer years ago, and everything the emotions that he brought to the World Cups and everything else. And I think there's a lot of unaware creatives that they could be pushing that don't necessarily push into just trying to capture what is already within that market.
Yeah, I think, like you said, he's kind of proof of. He's like the proof of aging gracefully, which I hadn't thought of as much in as much depth until you actually said it. Then I think there's so much they could be doing in that bucket. There's so much they could be doing through the lens of like routine, ritual, like his lifestyle, and just more narrative driven content, which I think is a whole like bucket they've just not really explored in that much detail quite yet. And I think that's probably going to need to be their next evolution of strategy. There's only so far they can go with the whole athletic screens is average, we're way better, the kind of mantra.
They've probably thought that's the lower hanging fruit. So initial campaign really trying to just capture existing market share.
Yeah, and I think that's strategy, and we've talked about this before, is like when you're launching a brand, and even when you're launching a new product. We did a big in-person meeting with one of our leading clients the other day, and we were talking about product development and product launches and how you go to market with a new proposition. And if you're entering a category or you're developing a product into a new area of your category or subcategory, it is possible to often look and be like, right, we are better on value, price value, quality and therefore you can go really heavily towards that, like, don't buy them, it's rubbish, buy this. We've seen that work with a few brands recently, and then you're surprised how far that can take you, but you are going to naturally at some point hit a ceiling, and that's where you need to take that step back and be like, what's our next evolution of creative strategy look like?
Yeah, exactly. And I think they can do that, us versus them or us against the industry, you know, where you're kind of villainizing the industry or green supplements as a whole through unaware creative, which is one thing. As we had Surrey founder on last week. One thing Surrey do really well is that, like, how they villainize the toothbrush industry and how dated it is and old, and you know, they use that, but they don't do it as a kind of middle of funnel solution aware type ad. It's very much like that top of funnel play. So I think they could be doing more of that, but through a slightly different type of creative that is driving more reach at the top of the funnel.
Yeah, they're interestingly doing a bit with other celebrities as well. I think it's Michael Chandler on their ad, who's a big UFC personality, one of the bigger light heavyweights, I think, if I might have got that wrong. But he's on quite a few concepts, so they've clearly got connections and people, and that I imagine they have a lot of budget, and they'll be able to diversify into these individuals' audiences. But I was talking to someone yesterday about who launched an influencer celebrity backed brand. The content execution on those posts is still almost as important as just working with the individual. Like, if they can make the whitelisting content with those people like 50% better, they will convert 50% more people. As I was speaking to someone who launched a celebrity brand, and they said that although on launch date they didn't hit their expectation for conversions, they got a huge spike in traffic, but that's just a signal that the content didn't sell the product enough, it didn't address enough objections. I think that's still really important. But yeah, I think they've obviously selected him with intention, similar to what you did with Club Neuro, I guess, in terms of alignment of brand and personality and audience. It'd be interesting to see how they develop that over time.
Yeah, for sure. I think, like, one thing I've learned with that, and with I think most brands that have a face of, is that gets you that initial spike, but that's not going to continue scaling the brand at the same rate. So it's like you have to then become very intentional about how you're using that face of brand or founder to drive sales and that strategy.
Yeah, it comes back to that content, doesn't it? Like, you have to build a content strategy and almost like a growth strategy around the individual. Similar, and that's what I think spoke to Jack from D Louise about doing that around Olivia. Obviously, George Heaton's another example of that. Like, it's building almost two marketing strategies that feed back into the same funnel, which is resource, time, and often it's difficult to do, but can drive a lot of results.
Yeah, and I think why I'm concerned that I guess IM8 won't be able to do it to that extent is just because of the time they probably get with David Beckham. So they probably have a much more rigid approach, which I imagine they can, you know, have a shoot day with him every quarter or something like that, where they have to be very intentional about what they're doing on that one day, rather than it feeling like he's truly part of that brand.
So also the, like, side by side to him against Gordon Ramsay, and just like Gordon Ramsay has lived and breathed reality TV for 30 plus years. He shows up on camera at just probably one of the best people if you're going to try and get him to do like an ad for any niche. Like, he's probably top three.
Yeah, because him demoing the product is literally just doing what he's done on TV for like 20 years.
And just putting a few D2C bits in it. He's going to find that easy. Whereas, like, Beckham, like, seen him on interviews, he's not got stiff. He's just not got that level of fluidity because he's not had to do it to that level. It's not been his bread and butter for that length of time. But yeah, just I think what they need to do is try and get to that kind of Gordon Ramsay level execution, because it will probably deliver similar results if they can do it, but different individual, different proposition, and different engagement, I imagine.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's get on to like the funnel then, and talk through maybe starting with website and then going into product page and landing pages.
Yeah, I think it's website is super intentional. It does what a lot of brands that even if I look across our brand portfolio, brands that are running like different pages for different levels of the funnel. That's like a very select few of people we work with. So like starting with an unaware ad and sending to a listicle, or starting with a like problem aware ad and sending to like a really heavy review driven page, and then running an us versus them and sending to a much more direct comparison against the other products. Like that level of intention, I think, is brands that we work with. However, when it's done, it works incredibly well. And I think that's something they're really good at when you look through their funnel is pairing an unaware ad with a landing page that really kind of develops on the narrative in the ad, but handles more of the objections that someone may have coming from that initial touch point.
Yeah, exactly. I think as well, like the way that it's probably one of the most social proof and trust building websites I've ever seen. You've got David Beckham above the fold straight away, with, you know, a PR feature underneath co-founding partner David Beckham. So that's all above the fold. You then, as you scroll soon after that, you've got that it's third party tested. You've got collaborators, including like University of Oxford. You continue scrolling, and then they've got a section specifically around the third party testing results.
Certifications,
and, you know,
isn't it?
the certifications, the statistics around the studies that they've done for this product. You continue scrolling on, and the next thing is real story, real results, and you've just got all of the 5-star reviews. So at every touch point as you scroll through that website, they are hitting you with trust and almost that very science-backed social proof.
I think their website's I think it's the strongest part of their marketing mix. I think it's so intentional. I think it's so intentional with the flow. I don't know how it converts, but it looks like it's you can tell that they've used data and used like customer data and surveys and review information to really be intentional with that messaging framework and that even the order, like you say.
Yeah.
And it differs by page.
Then you just keep going down, and like even from what I've just said, you've got what our ambassadors are saying, and it's just got a scroller of like all of these really well-known kind of micro to mid-level influencers talking about the products, reviewing it. And then even down, it's like driven by science and the minds behind it. And you've got about like 10 different doctors there just chilling with like just the flex of like some of these being like former chief scientists at NASA.
Yeah. That was one personality that I forgot to mention. Yeah, that's something they're leveraging pretty heavily.
Yeah,
across the board, it's like that credibility piece, which AG1 did through the lens of Huberman, through the lens of Serena Williams. They did it when and that I think the Huberman piece was one of the biggest reasons they blew up. Was getting onto podcast ads when they were a massive arbitrage opportunity through Rogan and Huberman. And they brought that credibility, but I think that's the same thing. But the whole funnel there is super intentional. I think and I think not enough brands test that customer journey, like pulling out that customer journey further. Like I've found that we've found some wins with brands where, we're running sort of the whole listicle, or like adding a step to the funnel if your product is a little bit more complex. You don't need to do it if you're selling jewelry, if you're selling fashion, because like super visual, the level of education needed to consume that product is pretty minor in comparison to something that you're gonna subscribe to and take every day, where like adding that extra step that allows you to qualify a customer and educate a customer in a much more detail than just the PDP can work really well. And that's what I think they're doing on some of their pages extremely well. Whether it's their identity or some of those third-party publisher pages, which they're also leveraging, like a lot of those, and those are very comparative versus AG1 again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and what in terms of like the funnels, they're obviously going after like a few different core areas, as you say, and it's very like persona driven and focusing on that educational side. So what are your thoughts on the actual kind of landing pages themselves?
I think the consistency is really solid. I think the intention, the structure is very good. I think the biggest thing is that congruency to ad touch point. Like, I think that's something that most brands probably have. If you take your top ads and spend some time aligning with the landing page with those top performers, I'm almost 100% certain you'd get a 10 to 20% conversion lift. It's not worth doing for every ad. It has to be ones that have performed, ones that are taking meaningful spend. But once you've got that, it's quite easy to spin up a test that takes the creator. I remember seeing a Skin and Me example of this back in the day, where they run a lot of quite like hero influencers, and they're a skincare, like a prescription skincare product, where you get like you do a funnel, you get sent like a dermatologist reviews your imagery. They send out like a prescription skincare.
Just launched Hair and Me, haven't they?
They've just launched Hair and Me. Yeah, I remember looking through some of their funnels, and they were doing like hero influencer stuff with Grace Beverly ad, and then the landing page was like just a case study of her journey in like 500-word case study, and it was just so perfectly aligned to where you found them.
Yeah.
And I just looking at that, like, that would crush.
I think that comes back to what we've spoken about before, about being more intentional about, if you're using bigger influencers, how can you use them like pre-click, post-click and really tell that story through that funnel. So you've got them within the actual performance creative itself. And then you also, when they click through, there's more of that testimonial or educational focused listicle that include them as part of that journey.
Yeah, even just pulling like quotes out of the ad, putting it as the on above the fold, like their face on the page again, renaming the product to XYZ's bundle if you've got that ability, like that will usually drive an improvement in conversion rate. And I think it's often overlooked, and that's the biggest thing that I think they're doing really well, is that alignment, and then the consistency and the intention behind the structure. Be interested to know how much A/B testing they're doing in like the order, because it'll like would surfacing David Beckham in the fold versus the scientists in the fold, like that order is something that I imagine they probably are experimenting with, and would probably bring some unlocks, finding the right like structure depending on scroll depth.
Yeah, I don't think they're leaning enough through the creative strategy into their unfair advantages. Like when I'm working with brands, I'm always like looking at what are the unfair advantages that we can really leverage through the messaging, and like a lot of that, just some of the experts that they've got behind it, the scientists, even David Beckham, like obviously they've got some creative with him. But I think like through the creative, they should be introducing things like that sooner, because it's just going to really heighten click-through rate.
Yeah, I think they need to squeeze more out of that relationship, even with the other experts that they've got involved. I think it's like you said, what can other people not replicate? And that's impossible for another brand to leverage. I think that's generally like a good way to look at D2C in general, is like you said, start with your unfair advantage and focus on the big things, the big needle movers.
Yeah.
And that's probably theirs.
Yeah. So I guess getting on to now content. Are we ready to get on to actual content?
Might be worth just double clicking into the solution aware funnel quickly before we go into content.
Yeah.
Because I think their whole business and their whole entry into market has been around that sort of solution aware angle, and they've got some like not so subtle pages that just are basically just ruthless comparisons to athletic screens. And
well, they literally say athletic AG1.
Yeah, which is probably the most direct us versus them I've seen from anyone, in terms of just taking on, not even doing like multiple people in the category. They're like, we're just going to take on AG1. Nobody else is worth the time. with like an 18 or 19 checklist, us versus them, that goes through every benefit and just how they are better in every category, which I think is super interesting to look at.
Yeah, there's like 30. It's like the classic us versus them, the green versus the red, and there's about 30 tick boxes there that IM8 are covering that AG1 aren't, which is just like so visual in just showing how much the product is better.
Well, it's interesting, yeah, because like I imagine, hypothesis, like most AG1 customers want the best product they can possibly get. They're probably not very price elastic, and they're probably like not that brand. Maybe I don't know how much they care about like alignment to a brand, and like it probably is quite successful. Like if I've read that, which I haven't swapped. I don't actually take AG1 at the moment. But if I was, and I went on that page and I spent the time reading through it, I probably would convert and move over, because it's just fundamentally a better product, and you want to be taking the best of the best if that's what your goal is. So I can see it working well.
Yeah, well, yeah, it definitely must be. And like I said, they're utilizing that at all parts of the funnel and within their creative, and whether it be like even on their product page, it's like, you know, the third section down, that comparison as well. But just like aside from that, sorry, jumping around a bit, but again, it's like coming into the market with a product like this, they could have very easily just made this like a green powder like all the others. Just the fact that they've like intentionally made the powder like a different color to like everyone else on the market, especially made that as a comparison point now. One thing that I see work really well, at least with statics with us versus them, is like real sharp comparison and contrast with like the colors, and how you almost like darken and unsaturate the them in that comparison.
They're really, we've seen a few of those, haven't we? The really famous one was that obvi static we made with the really happy strawberry, and then this moldy strawberry looking really depressed with the us versus them. I think Space Goods is an interesting brand, like to look at through that, like lots of statics in their ad library, really bold brand proposition that helps with that performance, just the visual identity, because it's just different.
Yeah.
But yeah, they've clearly, red and green couldn't be more contrasting, so that's obviously been an intentional decision.
Exactly. I didn't actually think of that till then, but like they've been, I feel like they've created this product, and the hypothesis is we've just got to make every aspect of this contrast and be better than AG1.
Yeah, and start with that, which I guess is it's like a simple checklist exercise, isn't it? Like, let's just make every a touch point better. And I think we'll come on to this with the content probably, but it's clearly worked, but it's the next evolution. Where do they go next? Which I think is like what makes it a big brand.
I'm just waiting for AG1 to start like tying this into their creative strategy now. Surely, like they've got to do a counter.
They've just launched on Amazon actually 2 days ago, I think, fully. They hadn't been on Amazon for ages. I was reading something. The CEO of AG1's quite active on Twitter, and especially recently, and she did a big post on like why they finally went on Amazon. It wasn't related to that. It was just related to like the right time operationally. But pretty mad they've never sold on there.
Yeah, that's wild.
They had people counterfeiting their products to the point where they had to put a certified, like, almost like the things you get on passports to certify that it's real AG1 on the pouches.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
See that a lot on Amazon. I bought fake Aesop serum before.
Yeah, the Essence Vault we had back like a couple of years ago, we had like a guy doing like 160 grand of a month of revenue, and he was just buying the product and buy one get one free and selling it full price. It's just like
smart.
So simple arbitrage.
Yeah.
Just before we move on from that solution or sort of direct comparison, my favorite ad that they've done in that bucket is, do you remember like Tekken Street Fighter screen where it'll be the two fighters with the verses in the middle? There's an ad where they've got the two athletic screens in the bottom corner and IM8 in the top corner with like the Street Fighter style. Yeah, just like so funny, so good, such good creative. But yeah, they've clearly gone for that easiest route into market, easiest way to capture demand from people who are already buying a product, have pretty low price elasticity, imagine pretty low brand loyalty based on that, and it's clearly worked because they're spending a lot on ads within that stage of the funnel. But yeah, I think that brings us nicely onto like creative.
Yeah. Well, I guess let's start on like the founder story stuff. I think I've done a bit of an audit of just like their main founder story creative, or the main couple of ones, the one that's been running in the ad account the longest.
How would you score them out of 10 on the founder story?
Don't want to be mean. just so much potential.
4?
I'd give it like a solid 5. I won't go 4. I'll go 5 out of 10.
Average.
Yeah, it's just straight average. I don't want to say this to the founders now listening. Not David Beckham.
Yeah.
But
It's constructive.
yeah, I think starting with the hook, like the hook is, this is IMA, everything you need for optimum health for today and tomorrow. Like, again, it's just feels very cheesy for a start. Like, it feels like it's something you would see on TVC, and it's like very broad. Optimum health, it's like it catches all and isn't tapping into like a specific pain point necessarily, or like at least being more specific about what that could be.
I also just don't think that's how a customer would speak.
Exactly.
Which I think is just so overlooked by brands.
It's so scripted.
Yeah, it's like, this is a scientist writing this. This is not like, you don't get up and make a green shake and be like, oh, I'm working towards my optimal health today. It's like, it's just it just doesn't feel right. And that's just, and
sounds like a mission statement almost.
yeah, it does. Yeah, which I think can work, but it's not going to resonate to that level, especially in today's world of like more native raw ads. I think that's a quick win.
Exactly. And we've gone through this journey where like you have to speak like the customer now.
Yeah.
And that's why, using tools like Reddit, little hack, use Gamma, which is a great tool, AI tool that can scrape Reddit based on keywords and key phrases and give some really strong insights on audience research. But like using tools like this is just so important. So we're speaking like the customer, because so many brands, as you say, just fall into the trap of speaking like a brand. And as a result, it's not authentic or relatable in any way.
Yeah.
I think another thing is like, there's just like zero curiosity gap there that is open. Like it doesn't leave you wanting to know more necessarily. But then also it's like, it's David Beckham. There's just, everyone knows David Beckham. Everyone knows so much about him. Where's the personalization there? His life is full of angles, pain, performance, longevity under pressure.
Modeling. Looks.
And just like none of that personal tension has been pulled through.
Yeah.
So I just think, there was a real missed opportunity to really kind of bring that relatability in.
Starting too much with an outcome and not with a pain, not with a real pain that someone's feeling. And I think that's just, so like it needs to go deeper into like the emotional or like physical issue that someone else would resonate with, and in a way that they would say that to someone they know.
Yeah, exactly. What's weird is like the David Beckham stuff feels like it's been done by like an agency that don't understand direct response or e-commerce, and then everything else has been done by D2C, DR experts.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, because I feel they feel very different. But yeah, I think like what I would probably do if I was kind of recreating that hook, I would. It's like, how can we really tap into that emotional response? And I think a great way to do that is really underutilized in paid creative on like Meta and TikTok is like nostalgia.
Yeah.
And Beckham comes with so much nostalgia just instantly. And it's relatable, and very much taps into that human emotion and connection with him as a subject. So it's like 20 years of playing at the highest level taught me this one truth about staying healthy. Or, years of pushing my body to the limit took its toll. This is how I fought back.
Giving him some free game here.
Or, I've had world-class trainers, nutritionists and doctors, but there's one thing I rely on every day. Pow. But do you know what I mean? It's like these are like tapping into the like nostalgia and David Beckham's history. And it's all of those have opened that curiosity loop, and that's one thing I'm really seeing working well with hooks at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I think that they're just not leveraging any of that right now. And then I think even when they're actually talking about like the product, how to utilize and how to get the benefits of the product, there's not enough like almost like making it sound easy, like one scoop a day. Like I think there's a lot of work to do in the body and the actual like the full concept.
Yeah, don't get me started on the body. The next line after the hook is, he starts talking about the booklet. It's like, what? How are we going on to the booklet and like, you know, how to read the booklet before we actually go onto the product itself? It's just like unneeded fluff, essentially.
Yeah.
And I think with a founder story like that, one thing that we've seen obviously work really well with unaware creatives and what they just need to do across their whole creative, performance creative as a whole, they like introduce the solution way too quickly.
Yeah.
And I think with all of our big supplement brands that we're working with now, all of their top spenders probably don't introduce the product or solution for 15, 20 seconds in. We're really sitting on the pain. We're really sitting on, you know, the education before we then actually introduce that solution.
Yeah, I was doing some creative research over the weekend, and it's like you start with the pain point, and then you almost explain the mechanism that results in the pain point, and that's like the education that then makes you feel like it like deepens the pain, makes you understand how you've got to the point of feeling that pain, and then you bring the solution in. And the concepts are getting to like 2-3 minutes in places. I saw an Oats overnight ad that was 5 minutes long from a founder the other day.
Yeah.
And it was amazing. And they're running it at like, they were running about 100 variations of it. So I'm like, it was probably working. Just him face to camera with the factory in the background, just chatting about the journey and how it was just really compelling.
Callum was showing me an ad. I forgot the name of the brand. They're running as a paid creative on Meta a 40-minute VSL.
God.
And it's been running for like 200 days.
Jesus, that's like a really top of funnel, isn't it?
Yeah. But like, yeah, it's so true. We're genuinely, all of our best performers now are like minimum a minute long in length. Like all of the rules we thought applied previously don't anymore.
I think another way you could do that is like, I was looking at a coffee ad the other day, the coffee piece of creative that was like, do you drink coffee daily was the hook. And it's like starting with something in the hook that's really resonates with a really broad audience, and then they explain how it results in a pain point.
Yeah.
And it's almost like it doesn't start with the problem, but it kind of starts with a habitual routine or something that you do very often and makes you understand why that's causing a problem, and then positions the product.
Exactly.
I thought that was a really interesting like other way of doing it that's a little bit less problem orientated in the hook, but still works really well.
Yeah, I love that, because then that's like almost casting the net wide.
Yeah.
And then you're kind of making it more, you're bringing it in more.
Yeah.
Within the funnel as you go through the creative.
I found that on TikTok Organic, which I think is a really good place to find those things. It had like 11 million views, and it was just this guy with a speaking into his headphones, just talking about the 3 reasons that coffee's bad for you. And it was just, yeah, really compelling, really, really organic, and really good idea for an ad.
Yeah, nice. And I guess like the final thing just on the founder stories as a whole, what's really important with founder stories is really showing the motivation of why the founder made the product. Like that's why the agitation of that pain point is so important, because they go on this personal journey of discovery of like there was nothing on the market that solved this problem, so I created it myself. And I think the reason why this is even more important with this is because when people see David Beckham associated with a brand, the first thing they're going to think is just, oh, how much did he get paid for that? Yeah. They almost need to create this like authentic story of like how he was part, you know, that could be created, but how they got to the point of motivation to create this product.
There's so many ways to do that for him as well. Like if you like when he was probably in his playing days, like the lengths and that they had to go to maintain like body condition, fitness in terms of like post-match routines, nutrition, and how far that's advanced, especially in the last 20 years. You could easily position it as like, I had to do all this, you just have to do this, and that would be such a compelling, the most like compelling way to do it. And there'd be so many different ways to do that, like other side of what he had to do, like routines, diets, training, sacrifice of time, etc., etc. All you have to do is one scoop.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And that's, I think they need to take you on that journey more. And I think another thing that this is just a small thing, but like, we don't actually see him consuming the product.
Yeah.
Which I just think, like, if it's a consumit, I just think it's just,
there goes the
just so important.
Just like over his shoulder.
Or just like sipping and spitting it out. Which I think is key. And I also think one that it's not dynamic enough. So we stay within the same location. Let's bring his lifestyle in more, because, you know, it's like you've got to rehook people throughout a creative. And, you know, we are moving more away from that, and you can be more raw and just one shot. However, because it's shot in this like high prod setting where we're still cutting between like shots of him just sat there in front of the box, I think there's like way more of an opportunity for us to like be rehooking the audience. And you could do that through that nostalgia play of like how you just flash up shots of him in his prime, and, you know, things like that just kind of show us that journey that he's been on.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see what they do as the next shoot, because I'm sure they'll have like quarterly or by like whatever that cadence looks like. But it'll be interesting to see how it develops. Definitely, we'll be keeping an eye out. I think for other brands watching, I think it's key that they spend a lot of time figuring out like that hook, that mechanism, that narrative of really agitating the problem for their brand, but doing it in a way that customers would talk about it. I think a really good place for that, as well as Reddit, is ad comments. If you've been running a lot of spend and you get a lot of comments on your ads, like, it's just people just speak in a certain way about pain points that isn't as stiff as people who are in the business are too close to the problem, I think.
100%. Grok as well is really good. Grok. I started using Grok for, it's similar to how Gamma work, Gigabrain. Sorry. How did I say Gamma earlier? I meant Gigabrain. How Gigabrain works with Reddit, it's the same as how Grok will work with Twitter or X, but it's more in the moment. So there's some really good insights that you can pull directly from that. But yeah, to be honest, like on the next shoot day, like I would test some other things, like different formats, go low prod. Like I think you could do some really intentional stuff with like just David Beckham holding the phone, just walking and talking to camera, having like comment reply boxes on screen. I think that could work really well. That's just something that's a little bit more relatable and feels more native to the platform.
Yeah, I would say one other thing is like, I know they're obviously going after the US market, but it's so American. Like the whole way they present the products, it's like I feel like you'd have a massive UK audience that they're probably not leveraging or not penetrating anywhere as near as much as they would be.
Yeah, I wonder how big David Beckham is in the US. I guess because of his in the MLS now, he's got quite well known.
I think he will do. He's just peak. He was in that really weird era of just media where it was just media frenzy about very few people, which was nuts.
Yeah, exactly. I think one thing they could also just be doing more of without him, that obviously we just see work really, really well, is those like PR style headlines, statics. So like David Beckham's viral immunity supplement finally launches, and just a picture of him holding the product.
Yeah.
You know, we're seeing those do really, really well across all of our accounts now, or like how women are using X, the viral X, to do Y. And that's just something that's so simple, because that's just like text on screen that just looks like PR.
Yeah, and they've got a lot of that from, they're doing a lot of publisher ads, but they're not doing that from their own identity, which I think is an easy quick win.
Yeah.
I'd say a lot of the static content from the founder led angle is a bit too polished. They don't use enough of that sort of overlays. There's not enough, like, it's just picture of him and products.
And the headlines are quite like just broad and vague and a little bit fluffy.
So I think there's loads to be done in that bucket. It'll be interesting to see how they develop that whole content work stream, because it'll be, I imagine, an ongoing, evolving piece.
One thing they are just doing really well is like the expert ads
That was what I was going to
in
come
the
on to
UGC
next, yeah.
content. And I think that's one thing we've seen in like nutrition and supplementation work just extremely well right now.
I think that's like thinking about things that is really hard to replicate again, and advantages. I think getting a trusted authority into a brand or a business, I think is if I was to start a brand, I would definitely do that. I think in today's landscape, because I think it's in a landscape of like false information and like people spinning up brands with big claims. Like I think it adds just depth and like credibility in a way that's very hard to manufacture if you don't do the hard work to set that up in the first place. And yeah, I think they're doing it really well. They've obviously got some big names, which helps, but I think the execution behind it is super, super strong.
Yeah, but they're like tapping into all types of experts.
Yeah.
So like I saw, obviously they've got the actual scientists, they've got nutritionists, they've got registered dietitians. Like they
Yeah.
are attacking every type of potential expert persona there is through this like very kind of UGC driven content, which is obviously working really well. I think the next evolution of that is to take the best performers and of those like expert content and recreating them as podcast ads. So bringing those experts in and doing like single one person, or you know, it could be with two individuals, and just ripping that same messaging as podcast ads at scale, and then testing that against like loads of different iterations and variations of hook, body. Because I think that just from one day of working with these experts and just recycling that winning messaging and putting that into different formats like podcasts could work really well.
Yeah, I think they need to take them further up the funnel still. I think there's an opportunity to do that from looking at some of that, the expert-led content. It still probably sits more towards like a little bit more towards solution and product aware than it does towards like the problem and the unaware stage.
Just educating as well.
That was, I was going to say, like, start with the education. Like, they're the best person to do that, and then bring the products in further down the line. Same with the founder story concepts. And I do feel like that's been a big shift in the last 6 to 12 months for performance. Is like, there's enough content out there for brands to understand and be able to execute on those structured, formulaic, lower funnel, lower awareness stage ads, but the real growth step changes come from problem aware and aware, but it's just harder to do. It takes more skill, I think.
Yeah, it does. I think it's getting easier though.
Yeah.
Like even you know, with AI now and just taking those best performers from other brands.
Yeah.
Especially if you've like trained AI on the education, on the studies that have been done. It can become easier because I think just not introducing the solutions so quick. But yeah, that was going to be my next point. I think we see this a lot, don't we? Like brands going to middle to lower of funnel and not enough in that like unaware stage. I think that would be my biggest point about the creative as a whole. They just need to be tapping way more into unaware. But I think obviously what's clear through this is like their strategy is let's tackle the low hanging fruit first, which is the us versus thems, and then we can maybe look to like broaden the audience.
Yeah, which I think is fine as a strategy. It's just like it's they need to recognize that and not just double down on the same thing. If like this not able to spend more on the CACs hitting the ceiling, and it's like not, that's really important for brands to do, is step back when that starts to happen and redo your research phase, redo your splits, redo your execution plan. Because that's the thing I'm seeing the most, is people making so many ads and just not being able to scale spend because they're just so focused on putting the products in the first 5 seconds really far down this into the solution bucket. It'd be interesting again to see how that develops over the next 6 months for them.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, look, like they, as I said earlier, they can use that us versus them higher in the funnel, like that villainizing and almost, you know, that attack on the industry is definitely something that works as an unaware ad. And they just need to adapt that messaging more and just not go straight into that product introduction like within 5 seconds.
Even spinning that to a before versus after for an individual is another way to do that. But keeping the product comparison, but just going more about like me who I was before consuming this product to who I am after. Like, it's a little bit more narrative driven, a bit more educational. You can do it through the lens of someone telling a story about how their life's kind of changed based on that decision. So I think that helps. That's another way to do that for sure.
Yeah. And I think another thing I would just do more if I was them, now that they've had like this first burst of creative through, is like and we've spoken about it a lot, just diversifying the vehicles that they are telling they're creating the ads through.
Yeah.
So like taking that winning messaging that they found so far and just recreating that as like whiteboard ads, just other forms of the more native creatives that don't necessarily do it in like your standard UGC way.
Yeah, I think they've been good with diversity of faces and individuals and who's delivering the message. But I think the diversity of format, which is that is probably that, and that more focus on upper funnel and diversity of the actual format that they're presenting the message through, is that next step for them.
Yeah. One, I saw one of their ads that was probably my favorite. Where is it? I've lost where this ad is now, but it's essentially, and I know Tev did one of these, which was funny, with Harrison and Misha actually. But when it's like there's two people running next to each other,
suspect.
And it's like suspect, and it's like the girl saying to the guy, "Suspect caught looking up David Beckham's supplement regime." But that was like a really funny one. So they're like, they are tapping into comedy and culture still, and remaining like relevant with those that are on social.
I think they're doing, their execution is strong. Like, I think they're a brand that people should be looking at as like someone who is like executing incredibly well. I think the area that's probably there's the most potential to improve is just around that kind of founders and upper funnel content piece. But I think if you look at the funnel, if you look at their customer journey, and you look at their like execution across the board, is super strong.
Yeah, I think overall very positive. I think we're obviously looking at this through like, what would we add to this?
Yeah.
But I think you could look at any brand in the world and do the exact same thing.
100%.
And there's few that have got as much right as they have so soon. So yeah.
100%. Yeah, I think in terms of like key takeaways, I think it's for everyone watching, firstly, download the Whimsical board, and I would encourage you to build that for your own brand. I think it's really interesting. I've done it for a couple of brands that I've been involved in, to lay out your funnel in that way and just get a bird's eye 30,000 foot view of everything that's going on side by side. Make sure it's aligned, spot any opportunities for gaps in messaging, any objections you're maybe not handling. Secondly would be like deep focus on problems and hooks that speak to like cold audiences in a way that they would speak, not just how you speak as a brand. And I had a third and it's gone. Let me look it up. Yeah, and then I guess third would be just diversity of individuals and people who are delivering a message, like, and leaning into the advantage that you have as a brand, whether that's a celebrity founder, whether that's you as a founder who's strong on camera, whether that's an expert, whether that's creators that you've got on retainers, whether that's influencers. I think that could be a super powerful vehicle for very quick and strong results if you get it right.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, I think that was a good little episode. I think if you haven't, please subscribe, because we put a lot of time into planning these episodes now. On YouTube, D2C Diaries, same on Spotify and Apple Music, and comment IMA, and we will obviously send you the whimsical board. But yeah, we'll see you on the next episode.